She is easily one of the most driven people I know. She has risen through the ranks like a meteor to become the creative director at Vladimir Jones. And I don't know exactly what she's going to say, but it's going to be amazing. So no pressure. Everybody, Jen!
All right, well, I don't know if I can live up to all that, but I'm very excited to be here tonight and excited that all of you came out again on your time off to talk about creativity and to learn about it. Tonight I'm going to give you a secret that's not talked about very much in creativity, but really it's the hidden secret to making ideas happen, and it's called empathy. And it's so much more powerful than ego. And today I want to talk about how you can use empathy to not only make your work better, but to motivate your team and to rise through the creative ranks. Because every idea hinges on audience buy-in, and it also must be bought in from your team to get it made. But first, let's talk about what empathy is not. Definition of empathy sometimes gets confused with compassion. And though compassion is often the effect after you feel empathy, it's not what empathy is. And of course, in leadership, people would say that giving into empathy is soft, maybe even napping kitten on a fur rug soft. Or maybe they just think empathy is all about wishy-washy, lens flare feelings. So many feelings here. But the truth of it is that empathy is an act of understanding another person. So much so that you can vicariously live through their eyes, and you understand why they behave the way they do. It's about stepping outside of your own perspective and trying to experience somebody else's, and allowing yourself to even rewire your own brain so that you think like somebody else. The reality is that empathy is not soft at all. It's not wishy-washy. It's actually the strongest weapon that we have to take on things like war and even apathy. But first, if you want to get to empathy, you have to get rid of this one thing that stands in the way of that. The villain of empathy is your own ego. So we're going to talk about how you can ditch that. And we'll also go through what ego does to a team, to your work. None of it's good. So in nature, or even at the bar, this sort of activity has a purpose. When you go out there and you're posturing and you're trying to basically make yourself a viable option to maybe even continue the survival of a species. Like that, there's a purpose for that. But when it comes to ideas, boastfulness will leave you working by yourself. So the more you're showing off, the more you're talking about all these great things you're doing, the less you're getting people invested in helping you make these ideas, because they feel like they don't own it, or there's no place for them. So impressive beard or not, the less you make everything about you, the more you'll grow. If you're a creator, your work is for your audience. And if you lead a team, it's about your team, it's not about you. And the sooner you can feel in line with that way of thinking, the more you'll realize that the more you help others, the further you go in your career. So when you connect words like I and my to your ideas, you immediately turn people away, and they're less likely to help you. So when you give somebody else ownership in your idea, you bring them in, and you become an integral part of that team's capacity. And even with clients, if you can give them a piece of ownership in your idea, they will go with you because they'll feel like it's theirs. So you want to make sure it's not about you, it's about everybody else. So when you think of the word ego, a lot of the energy that goes into maintaining an ego and a certain essence about yourself is actually coming across more like this. And it's not helping you, because this is a reputation that you're building that's not what you want. And you'll find people that are really strong egos will do things like make excuses, or they'll try to blame somebody else for a problem. So you receive a challenge and you ask, who's to blame for this? Why did I get this? How is this happening? Instead of asking, how can we solve this? And trusting that somebody brought you something because they need help and they want to just figure it out. So in today's fast-moving world, there's no room for egos. And no matter what your title, be willing to dig in and help your team. Because the more you can be a go-to person, the more everybody will respect that you're working as hard as you expect them to work. You're not just maintaining this persona you've created. So the best advice I have is to stay humble and hustle, because this will take you further than anything else that you have in your mind for what you think you need to be. It's about doing the work, inspiring people to do the work, and just never settling. And it also makes you realize that you need to lead by example and lead from within. The harder you work, the more people will see what you're doing, and they'll get on board. They'll want to help you, and you'll grow. So another trick I'm going to teach you is how to make your mind think with a little bit more empathy, because we're not wired this way. We're wired to think about ourselves. And with social media and narcissism, anytime you're posting something, you want to just tell the world, and all of that's great activity, but when it comes down to it, it's not the thing that's going to resonate with people. You being interested in somebody else, that's what they're going to take away, and that makes you a leader. So let's talk a little bit about how time and observation work. When you're a kid, if you remember, everything took forever because you were taking in every single detail of a situation and you were analyzing it. Your brain was trying to make connections. And at some point, your brain makes these connections and it gets a little bit, lazy about things. So it stops looking at everything, and it just picks up little pieces. And what this does is it takes away our ability to truly experience a situation because we glaze over things. And I think this gets back to survival mode. That's why you'll feel a lot of this time being longer when you're in a new situation and your brain's on high alert. And I think it goes back to this survival instinct because you don't know what's going to happen. You're not familiar with the surrounding, so you have to pay attention. And when you're in this mode, this is when you pick up more things. This is when you really get who you're talking to or what you're trying to connect with. So like I said, over time our minds get lazy, and we want to make assumptions. We want to just skip to the end. And that's where we lose out on that chance to really get who somebody is, to understand somebody when we're not just making an assumption about what they are. And this happens in places like the grocery store. Honestly, your mind is tired and it doesn't want to take in all of the details from this aisle. It just wants to go right to what it's after. But if you go into environments in a way that you do take in everything around you, it is going to grow your empathy. You're going to get why an environment is important to a person, and you're going to connect with more things. So what we need to do is just reset our brains. We're missing a lot of details. We can decide to be more present. We can not skip over things. We can assess each challenge on its own merit and not just assume that we know the answer. And be open to other ways of thinking. And part of that is just being able to learn and unlearn. So just because something is the way it is right now doesn't mean it should be, or doesn't mean it will be tomorrow. So being like a sponge and taking in everything, constantly reassessing is really important if you're going to understand somebody or if you're going to create something that's meaningful. And let others prove you wrong. This is a big one. A lot of times we're so concerned about being right that we're not willing to listen to a new idea is more right. And of course, with this, preconceptions are poison. So choose to let yourself be constantly surprised by people and possibilities. Don't just think you know everything. And to bring empathy into your everyday, you need to pivot your perspective. You need to influence yourself by going to places where your audience is. Watch what they do, hang out where they go, watch movies they would watch that you don't watch, just to get in their mindset, know what drives them, read autobiographies, really get behind why people do what they do. And just like kids inherently pretend when they play, this action should never stop when you get older. You should put yourselves in somebody else's shoes and not just be thinking of yourself. And another trick I'll give you, if you're creating something for a specific audience, it's really helpful to create a playlist that audience would like. And you'll get in their mindset. You'll start to feel what they feel, and a certain look will come about that you maybe would have not gotten to. And all of this talk about empathy is basically to control feedback like this. Because when you don't understand your target, or you don't understand why you're doing something, people will give you feedback just for feedback's sake. Things like, this sandwich needs to be more playful, or we need more images of groups of people having non-specific types of fun. Or, I really like the color, but can you change it? So there's no connection to this work. Nobody's feeling anything with this work. They're just wanting to change things because they don't know what to change. So my best advice for leadership is to cultivate your calm, because most of the people in leadership positions are not trained to be there. They just exhibit something that makes their team trust them. And a lot of that has to do with being able to get through a stressful situation and not lose it. So you can use empathy to cultivate this calm, and you can get people to trust you just because you're even keel. So this is our first instinct when we have issues, is we make it about us. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's coming down on us, whether it's a client being upset about something, or a deadline was promised that we didn't agree to, and we just react, and we feel like the world's against us and it's all about us. But we have to remember that everybody we work with has a motivation beyond what we know. Your client may just be concerned about keeping their job, or they may want to get a promotion, and they may want to do something that's a little bit crazy. But being able to think that every project that you work on is driven by something you may not know is something that you need to get through, and you need to sometimes imagine it yourself. Even when you talk to a client or you talk to your team, try to get to what you think is motivating them. And stay solution focused, of course. So this is a trick that you can use when you have no control over the situation. And your only thing that you're trying to do is to stay calm and be able to do your job and stay solution focused. So imagine if you're driving down the interstate and somebody cuts you off. Your first instinct is to get really mad. And so mad, sometimes it throws off your whole day. You come in the office, you just started off wrong. But what if you reframe what really happened? And you start to think about what the driver was thinking that cut you off. Maybe this driver is trying to get their kid to the hospital. Maybe it's an emergency situation. Maybe that's not true at all. But it changes your mindset, and you're not mad anymore, and you're actually all for this guy or woman for whatever they're trying to get to, and it's great. So you just go with it, and you have sort of that calm surfer mentality that there are waves of things that are going to happen but you'll figure out how to write it, whatever it is. And you don't worry about this driver that you initially think is out to get you, and they cut you off. But you come into the office and you're like, all right, well, things are good. Even more extreme for empathy. I think we've all been in this scenario, whether you're on a plane or your own kids. There's a crying baby, and sometimes it goes on for a really long time, and there's nothing you can do about it. I think I was on a plane trip just last year where, seriously, the kid cried for 3 hours straight. And I don't know what happened to cause this crying, but nobody could appease this crying. But if you stop and think for a minute, and this is extreme empathy here, what it's like to not be able to communicate discomfort with the world, and the only way you can communicate is crying, you'd be just as cranky as this kid. And you get why they're crying. So a culture of contribution is what I'd like to try to affect, as far as all of you taking this back to your agencies or continuing thinking about this. It's not so much about what you've done or one-upmanship, it's about what you did to help the process or help your team. It's not about ruling followers, it's about mentoring more leaders. It's about giving back. It's not about being out in front. So just a chart to sort of demonstrate this process. It starts by listening, and really listening. Don't just be thinking about what you're gonna say next while somebody's talking. I know we all tend to do that. We space off, we're creatives. But be present, listen. Innovate based on what you hear, based on what you feel. Contribute to the greater team, and then iterate on that. And sometimes you go back and forth between those two for a really long time until you get to something you're really excited about, and then you improve that. But it's all about staying inspired and doing great things. And it's not a process that just starts and stops. It goes on and on and on. When you finish a product or a advertising campaign or whatever it may be thinking about what you do next. Be thinking about how to make it better, because that's where your value is. And as far as the workforce goes, it's really about that two-way relationship. It's about listening to your team, and it's about actually leading by listening, not just putting it aside. And if we all think with a little bit of empathy, it starts about expecting success, not failure. It's pretty amazing what happens when you expect your team to succeed, and that success is theirs to lose. It's amazing how much people will exceed expectations when they think they already have that success. They don't want to give it up. They feel like people are counting on them, and they'll work harder, and they feel valued. So overall, empathy is understanding. And that's why it's so important to think about the things that Jeff and Matt said even. Think about that through data. Think about that through account leadership even. Jeff had a great presentation on how to think like an account executive, but yet be a creative at heart. All of that gets back to empathy and why something matters. So understanding how to use empathy and really committing to it will help you make ideas better. And that's all I have.